Did you know there are animals out there that died tens of thousands of years ago and still have their eyelashes? Not a fossil, not a shape pressed into rock, an actual face, fur, and whiskers still attached, exactly the way it looked the moment it stopped breathing. Most creatures that die don't get that mercy. The ground usually finishes a body off within a season, but permafrost is different. It grabs a creature at the exact second of death and holds it there, frozen solid, until a miner's hose, a melting riverbank, or a random landslide finally lets it go thousands of years later. Today we're counting down 6 of the most terrifying animals that ice has ever given back, starting with the unsettling and ending with an actual frozen crime scene. 6. The Startsevo cave bear, a predator frozen mid-snarl. In 2020, reindeer herders working on the remote Lyuba Islands off Siberia's northern coast stumbled onto the fully preserved body of an adult cave bear, a species that vanished from the planet roughly 15,000 years ago. It was the first adult cave bear ever found anywhere on Earth with its soft tissue still intact. Not just a skeleton, but its nose, its teeth, its muscle, and its internal organs all still sitting exactly where they belonged. Cave bears were massive animals, some estimated at nearly twice the size of a modern grizzly, built with a skull shape designed to crush bone rather than simply tear meat. This particular bear had died with its lips slightly parted, exposing a set of teeth clearly built for that exact purpose, frozen mid-expression in a way that made several researchers uncomfortable to look at directly. Radiocarbon dating placed her death somewhere between 22,000 and 39,500 years ago, a window wide enough that researchers still can't say for certain which exact chapter of the Ice Age she came from. Before this discovery, almost everything scientists knew about cave bear biology came from cave floors littered with bones, sites so dense with skeletal remains that entire caverns in parts of Europe are nicknamed bone caves. This was the first time anyone had ever studied the actual soft tissue of one of the most feared predators of the Ice Age. Because her organs were still there, scientists were able to examine actual cave bear anatomy in detail for the first time in the history of the field, rather than relying entirely on skeletal guesswork, the way paleontologists always had before. Local researchers on the islands have since reported finding additional bear remains nearby, suggesting this particular stretch of coastline may have been used as a denning site across multiple winters. It raises an uncomfortable possibility that more fully intact cave bears, jaws and all, are still sitting under that same ground right now. A predator frozen with its teeth still bared is unsettling enough on its own. Number 5 is where the body stops matching the story around it. 5. Lyuba, the most complete mammoth on Earth. In May 2007, a reindeer herder named Yuri Kuti was walking along the Lyuba River on Russia's remote Yamal Peninsula when something small and pale caught his eye, half buried in the frozen mud along the bank. What he found was a baby woolly mammoth, curled up almost peacefully, so untouched by time that when scientists lifted her out of the ground, she still had curdled milk from her mother sitting inside her stomach. She was named Lyuba. Carbon dating placed her death at around 41,800 years ago, when she was barely 1 month old, and to this day she remains the single most complete woolly mammoth ever discovered on Earth. Her trunk, her tiny ears, her eyelashes, and even her miniature hooves were all completely untouched by decomposition. A CT scan showed sediment packed deep inside her airways. She had slipped into a muddy watering hole, panicked, and suffocated while inhaling wet clay as she struggled to climb back out. What made scientists genuinely uneasy wasn't the tragedy of how she died. It was how alive she still looked lying on the examination table. Photographs of Lyuba don't resemble ancient fossils in the slightest. They resemble a sleeping animal that might open its eyes at any second. Multiple museum visitors who have stood in front of her preserved body have reported the same unsettling instinct, leaning in slightly just to check whether she's still breathing. Researchers also examined her stomach and intestines directly and found traces of her mother's dung inside her digestive tract, a behavior still seen in modern elephant calves, who eat their mother's waste in the first weeks of life to seed their own gut with the right bacteria. Lyuba now tours the world inside a specially designed glass case, and every institution that hosts her has to maintain her at a precise sub-zero temperature around the clock. Because if she's ever allowed to fully thaw, the decomposition that permafrost delayed for over 40,000 years would finally catch up to her within days. A face that still looks alive is one kind of unsettling. Number 4 is a body that still acts alive. 4. The Lena foal, a baby horse with liquid blood in its veins. In August 2018, a team of scientists exploring the Badyarikha crater, a massive permafrost sinkhole in Siberia so deep and unstable that locals call it the gateway to the underworld, uncovered the frozen body of a foal belonging to an extinct species of Ice Age horse called the Lenskaya horse. She had died around 42,000 years ago, only a few days after being born, and her body had barely begun to break down before the surrounding cold locked her permanently in place. Her fur, hooves, and tail were all fully intact, and her muzzle still had the soft, undeveloped look of a newborn animal. But the detail that stunned the research team came when they cut into her chest cavity. Liquid blood came out of her heart vessels, not frozen solid, not crumbling to powder the way ancient tissue usually does, but still soft and dark enough to flow, over 42,000 years after her death. Music. It's one of only a small handful of times in scientific history that liquid blood has ever been recovered from an animal this old. Scientists went on to extract living cell samples from her muscle tissue, sparking a genuine debate over whether the Lenskaya horse could theoretically be cloned back into existence. She died so quickly after birth that researchers still argue over one basic question: whether this foal ever stood up and walked on her own legs at all, or whether she died before she ever got the chance. The leading theory is that she drowned in liquid mud, since researchers found no external injuries and no signs of a predator attack anywhere on her body. What makes her especially valuable to scientists isn't just her age, but her timing. The Lenskaya horse is a fairly recently extinct species compared to something like a mammoth, meaning her genome is close enough to modern horse DNA that researchers can compare the two side by side almost gene for gene, reshaping part of the scientific understanding of how modern domestic horses evolved. Blood that still flows after 42,000 years is hard to sit with. Number 3 doesn't have a body attached to explain itself at all. 3. The Tumat wolf head, a skull with its brain still inside. In 2018, researchers working in the Badyarikha district of Siberia's Sakha Republic were digging through a permafrost cavity when they pulled out something that had never once been recovered fully intact in the history of paleontology. A severed wolf's head, fur, and skin still attached to the skull, dated to roughly 40,000 years old. Scientists ran a CT scan and found something that made the entire team stop and recheck their equipment. The brain tissue inside was still there. It had shrunk over the millennia, but it had never fully decomposed, and it was still sitting inside the cranium in roughly its original shape. The first time in recorded history an Ice Age predator's brain had ever been recovered largely intact. The wolf's fangs, whiskers, and even the cartilage inside its nose were preserved well enough that paleontologists could examine the texture of its fur under a microscope, strand by strand. What nobody has been able to explain is how the head became separated from the rest of the body, or where the rest of that wolf ended up. Somewhere underneath that same stretch of Siberian permafrost, there may still be a headless wolf's body waiting for someone to find it. Genetic testing on the tissue revealed something else researchers weren't expecting. This wolf belonged to a distinct Ice Age lineage that doesn't directly match any wolf population alive today, closer to a cousin species that simply didn't make it. That same excavation site has already produced 2 frozen wolf pups from a different, slightly younger layer of permafrost, which tells scientists this stretch of riverbank was likely a wolf den site used across multiple generations, one collapsing on top of the last as the centuries passed. A head with no body raises one question. Number 2 is a body with no explanation for how it lost its face. 2. The Badyarikha cub, a saber-toothed cat frozen mid-growth. In 2020, along the remote Badyarikha River in Siberia, researchers recovered the frozen body of a saber-toothed cat cub belonging to the species Homotherium latidens, a predator that vanished from the planet roughly 10,000 years ago. It is to date the only saber-toothed cat ever found anywhere on Earth with its soft tissue preserved. Scientists had studied this species for over a century using nothing but bones and teeth. This was the first time anyone had ever actually seen its face. The cub was only around 3 weeks old when it died, sometime between 35,000 and 37,000 years ago. Its fur turned out to be a dark, almost chocolate brown, a genuine surprise, since decades of paleo-art had always shown the species in sandy, lion-like tones based purely on guesswork. Its neck, forelimbs, and skull shape were already noticeably different from a modern lion cub of the same age. Thicker, denser, built for a hunting style no living cat on Earth still uses. Researchers described its face as almost unrecognizable as a cat at first glance, closer in proportion to a small bear cub than to any modern kitten. Nobody has been able to determine what killed it, or where the rest of its litter ended up. Somewhere in that same stretch of frozen Siberian riverbank, there may be more of them still waiting. For over 100 years, everything scientists thought they knew about Homotherium came from teeth and leg bones dug up across Europe and North America. Never anything soft, never anything with a face attached. Researchers were able to examine its paw pads directly and confirmed they were structurally different from a modern big cat's, built more for endurance, running across open ground than for the short, explosive ambush pounces lions and tigers rely on today. It took one 3-week-old cub, frozen by accident in a Siberian riverbank, to finally prove what paleontologists had only been able to guess at from bone fragments for over a century. A predator whose own death is a mystery is unsettling. Number 1 isn't a mystery at all. It's a crime scene that never got cleaned up. 1. Blue Babe. The bison, the lions, never finished. In 1979, a placer miner named Walter Roman was blasting frozen ground apart with a high-pressure water hose outside Fairbanks, Alaska, trying to reach the gold-bearing gravel underneath. Instead of gold, a dark, leathery shape rolled loose from the mud and landed at his feet. It was a steppe bison, a species that vanished from North America thousands of years ago, and this one had been sitting in that exact spot for roughly 36,000 years. Scientists nicknamed him Blue Babe, after Paul Bunyan's giant blue ox, because a mineral reaction had turned his exposed skin a strange, metallic blue-gray over the millennia. But the color wasn't what unsettled researchers. When they examined his hide inch by inch, they found 4 deep puncture wounds punched into his hindquarters, spaced almost exactly like the bite radius of a large cat's jaw. A predator, almost certainly an American lion, significantly larger than any lion alive today, had ambushed him from behind and brought him down. Music claw marks raked across his flank showed the animal had been torn open while still alive, and part of his tail had been chewed away entirely before he ever stopped struggling. Then, before the lion could finish its meal and drag the carcass off, the Alaskan cold moved in and froze the entire scene solid. The predator lost its kill to the weather. The bison's body sat there, undisturbed, locking in the exact violence of his final minutes for 36,000 years. When scientists finally finished their examination, they cooked a small piece of his neck meat and served it at a dinner to celebrate the discovery, Several attendees reported that 36,000-year-old bison stew was, in fact, edible. Today, his taxidermied body still stands on permanent display at the University of Alaska Museum of the North, posed in a low, defensive crouch, as if he's still bracing for an attack that technically finished 36,000 years ago. What makes Blue Babe genuinely rare isn't just his age. It's that he's essentially a crime scene frozen mid-investigation. Most Ice Age predator kills leave nothing behind but scattered bones, with the occasional tooth mark, if researchers are lucky enough to find them at all. Blue Babe gave scientists something almost no other fossil has ever offered: the actual soft tissue evidence of a specific predator-prey encounter, preserved down to the exact angle of the claw marks.